Welcome to Cheat Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. She said I was just convenient. Not exciting. Said it flatly, publicly, without flinching. And I sat completely still, because the version of me that would have argued, begged, or performed his pain for the room, that version had already decided. No fight. No scene. Just a quiet, methodical exit she would never see coming until it was already done. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 34 years old. And what I'm about to tell you isn't a story about rage. It's a story about clarity. The specific, cold, permanent clarity that arrives when someone finally shows you exactly who they are, and you finally believe them. We were at a work dinner. Her colleagues mostly. Strangers to me, all laughing over drinks and stories I wasn't part of. I was there physically, but I wasn't included in anything happening at that table. Looking back, I think that was intentional. I think she had needed an audience that night. There was a man, Ryan. He appeared in her office stories, her tagged photos, always positioned just close enough to raise questions and just far enough to avoid answering them. That evening she leaned toward him a little too close. Her laugh a beat too warm. Her hand brushed his arm in that deliberate casual way people touch someone they've been wanting to touch. The warmth she aimed at him used to be mine. I recognized it because I had spent 3 years trying to earn it back. Someone at the table made a joke about how long we'd been together. I smiled. She tilted her head, studied me the way you study something unremarkable, and said it without hesitation, "You're just convenient. Not exciting." The table went quiet. Even Ryan looked somewhere else. And I sat there. Not because I had nothing to say, but because she needed the silence more than I needed to react. I looked at her and saw a stranger. A woman who used to reach for my hand in crowded rooms now wore my presence like something mildly embarrassing. Something inside me went quiet. Not the hurt kind of quiet. The permanent kind. She laughed it off later. Said she was joking. But her eyes didn't do what they do when she's joking. No softness. Just calculation dressed up as humor. That night I lay beside her and understood. This wasn't a rough patch. This was a decision I had been too patient to make. That changed tonight. A few days later I stopped by her office to drop a charger in her car. Nothing significant. I saw her before she saw me. She was at the coffee station with Ryan. The angle of her body toward his. The particular tilt of her head. The laugh she released without any of the effort it had started to cost her around me. I stood there long enough, then turned around and walked out without a word. It wasn't betrayal in that moment. It was a check mark. A confirmation of something I had been trying not to name for months. And naming it, finally, clearly, without softening it, felt less like pain and more like surgery. The moment the scalpel goes in and you realize the cut is clean. That night her phone lit up at 11:48. She glanced at it, smiled with the lower half of her face only, locked the screen, and placed it face down on her nightstand. She thought I didn't see. I always saw. I had just stopped admitting to myself what I was looking at. The next morning she kissed my cheek, called me tired-looking, made a small joke, went through the whole routine like the world owed her ease. And something in me shifted. Not into pain, but into something colder and more useful. The kind of clarity that doesn't ask questions anymore. The kind that simply starts collecting answers. I began noticing things I had trained myself to overlook. The shared calendar. Entire afternoons gone blank where she used to schedule everything. Receipts folded near the top of the trash. A hotel bar across town. Lunch for 2 on a Tuesday that I hadn't been invited to and hadn't been told about. I didn't confront any of it. I documented it. Quietly. Without ceremony. Not for a fight. For myself. Because I was no longer trying to protect the relationship. I was protecting me. Her phone never left her hand. She flinched when I reached near it just to pass it to her. She laughed in the bathroom at something on her screen, then walked out stone-faced, performing a reset she thought I couldn't see. The emotional whiplash had stopped hurting. It just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't her priority. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. So I stopped trying to fix it. And I started watching, the way you watch something you're studying rather than something you love. The first thing I cut off was availability. She was used to me filling every gap, answering every text, picking up every call, being present before she even registered needing me there. I had done it for years without questioning it. Like breathing. Like a reflex so deep I had forgotten it was a choice. Now I questioned everything. I muted her notifications. Not in anger, in precision. I wanted a different rhythm. One where I wasn't orbiting her moods anymore. Calibrating my presence to whatever she needed on any given day. Adjusting my pace to her temperature like I was a thermostat and she was the room. When she asked me to pick something up after work, I said I had plans. I didn't. When she called to check in, I let it ring. When she texted asking where I was, I read it, locked my phone, and went back to sitting quietly somewhere she had no knowledge of. She noticed faster than I expected. A longer look when I entered a room. A second message when the first received nothing. A softness in her voice she hadn't used in months, deployed now not from warmth but from the beginning of concern. But I stayed quiet. Let the silence occupy the space where effort used to live. I worked later. Took walks without telling her. Left before she woke up. No note. No goodbye. Just gone. One night I came home to find her on the couch. Makeup smudged, TV playing nothing, clearly waiting. She looked up startled and said I hadn't told her where I was. I shrugged. Walked past. Closed the door. The next morning I turned off location sharing. She pretended not to notice. But I watched her frown at her phone for a beat longer than she intended. I stopped making her coffee. Stopped waiting for her to come to bed. Stopped asking how she slept, how her day went, whether she was okay. I still existed in the apartment. I just wasn't present in it. And presence, I had learned, isn't about bodies occupying the same space. It's about energy moving in someone's direction. Mine had stopped. And she was only beginning to understand what the absence of it actually felt like from the inside. Ryan had a pattern. He appeared in her tagged photos, her stories, always positioned just close enough to raise questions, never close enough to answer them cleanly. I didn't confront any of it. I looked at what he had left behind. Late one night while she slept I opened her laptop. Not for messages. I didn't need those. I needed something structural. And buried in her downloads I found an email chain flagged by their company's internal audit system. His name appeared twice, tied to expense purchases that had no clean paper trail. Amounts too specific to be mistakes. A pattern too consistent to be oversight. I copied what I needed. Closed everything. Left no trace. The next day I drove to the public library. Created a temporary email. Forwarded the chain to their HR department with zero commentary. No threat. No signature. Just documentation delivered to the people whose job it was to act on it. I didn't need to watch it happen. But I did. Over the following week she came home tenser each evening. Snapping at small things, the TV volume, clutter by the door, the way I left dishes to dry. She didn't say his name. But I watched it move beneath the surface. The bruised pride. The quiet controlled panic of someone whose carefully arranged world is developing cracks in places she can't reach. One night she threw her phone on the couch and sat completely still. Eyes blank. Entirely absent from the room she was sitting in. Something had broken. Not from anything loud I had done. From one quiet, precise, perfectly timed action taken in total silence. I had simply lifted the layer she assumed no one could see beneath and placed it where the right eyes would find it. I overheard her on a call late that week, his voice defensive and fast, hers low and controlled. He was explaining how something had been processed under his card. That someone had reported it. That it had become a whole thing. She ended the call. Stood in the kitchen for a long time. I walked past her like I hadn't heard a syllable. Quiet action reaches places loud accusations never can. She had underestimated the version of me that stopped asking to be seen. That was her final mistake. She kept the polished version intact in public for a while. The right outfit. The right laugh. The right amount of ease displayed to the right people at the right moments. She was practiced at it. I had watched her perform the version of our marriage she preferred for years. Warm, balanced, chosen. and I had played my part without complaint because I had believed in what was underneath the performance. Now there was nothing underneath it, and I stopped performing my half. We went to a small gathering. 6 people, old friends, a dinner that should have felt easy. She reached for my hand at one point. I didn't move mine toward her. A small thing, barely visible. But her friend Kate noticed. Kate watched us the entire evening with the quiet, focused attention of someone doing math she doesn't like the answer to. Later I heard Kate ask her softly in the kitchen, "Are you two okay?" She said I was just tired. But practiced answers don't land when the foundation beneath them is already cracking. People felt it. The way I'd stopped offering small gestures. The way she overcompensated by laughing louder and leaning closer to compensate for the warmth I had withdrawn. The ease she performed wasn't landing because ease can't be performed when its source is gone. Someone made a harmless joke about relationships, and Kate said, to no one in particular, "You can only ignore someone for so long before they stop showing up." The room moved on. She didn't laugh. I watched her face from across the room and saw exactly where that line landed. After that evening, quietly and without a single announcement, her world began to contract. Friends called less. Invitations thinned. Messages sat on read longer than before. Not because I said a word to anyone, but because people sense one-sidedness. They sense when someone is holding everything alone. When one person is fighting and the other is just collecting. For once, the person fighting alone wasn't me. And the people who had always assumed she was the anchor of the relationship began quietly, privately, revising that assumption without being asked to. She started staying home more. Not by choice, because there was nowhere left to go. Her circle had thinned without drama or confrontation. The friend she had relied on to reflect her own image back, vibrant, in control, desired, had simply drifted. Not because of anything specific. Because people drift from someone who only shows up when it's useful. Who calls when she needs something and goes quiet when she doesn't. Who performs closeness without actually offering it. She tried to reconnect. Sent messages. Called her sister twice in 1 week after months of silence. But there were too many missed calls behind those attempts. Too much selective availability over too many years. No one rushed. And I didn't either. I still moved through the apartment. Still exchanged short sentences when necessary. But the warmth, the care, the effort, the small automatic gestures I had aimed at her for years without even registering them as choices, was gone. Completely and without announcement. And she felt its absence the way you feel a draft from a window you cannot locate. Real and cold and impossible to fix without finding the source. She started hovering. Offered coffee I didn't ask for. Left on shows I used to like. Brushed past me in the kitchen and waited, a half-second too long, to see if I'd step toward her. I moved around her like she was furniture. Not out of cruelty. Out of the complete absence of need. That is what happens when someone drains the last thing in you that cared. You don't hate them. You just stop registering them as essential to anything. One evening I found her standing in the hallway. No coat. No shoes. No destination. Just standing, like she'd forgotten where she was going or why she'd gotten up at all. She looked at me like she wanted to ask something fundamental. Something that had been building for weeks. She didn't ask. Because she already knew. She had built a marriage where I carried the weight of 2 people's emotional lives. And the moment I set mine down, everything started falling. Not with noise. Not with drama. With the specific suffocating weight of absence. The confrontation I had always imagined, raised voices, slammed doors, some dramatic moment of mutual reckoning, never came. Instead it arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening while I sat on the couch going through emails. She stood in the hallway watching me long enough that I finally looked up. Something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the practiced sharpness she had perfected. Not the performance. Just uncertainty. Raw. Unguarded. The face of someone who has run out of moves. She asked if we could talk. I set my phone down and waited. She said I'd been distant. That something had shifted. That she couldn't feel me anymore. Asked if I was angry, if I was holding something back, if there was something she had done that I needed to say out loud. I said I wasn't angry. I was done trying. Her face tightened. I told her I had spent too long carrying something she kept stepping away from. And now I was doing what she had always seemed to want, focusing entirely on my own life. My own peace. My own mornings. She said people go through rough patches. That maybe we had lost our rhythm but could find it again with effort from both sides. I told her it wasn't about rhythm. It was about what someone shows you when they think you're not paying attention. And she had shown me, through her words, her choices, the way she looked at me across that dinner table and called me convenient without flinching, that my happiness was not her concern. Love doesn't stop when that happens. It just loses oxygen. Slowly. Completely. And dies without warning. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. But I didn't hold on either. I gave her the exact thing she had given me for months. The absence of rejection without the presence of warmth. That specific cold middle space where nothing is refused and nothing is offered. She asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know. Because it no longer mattered. That question had an expiration date. And we were well past it. The end didn't come with a speech. It came one morning while I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee. She walked in quietly, no makeup, bare feet, sweatshirt, hair loose. Carrying the weight of everything she had refused to acknowledge until acknowledging it became the only thing left. She looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to remember before it's gone. Maybe who we were before the dinner table. Before the silence built its walls. Before she stopped choosing me and I stopped asking to be chosen. I set the mug down. Picked up the last small bag by the door. She spoke. Not a plea, not anger. Something quieter than both. A confession with nowhere left to hide. She said she was wrong. That she hadn't understood what she was doing until there was nothing left to reach for. That she had assumed I would always stay because I always had. That she hadn't seen how far I'd already gone until the distance became a country she had no map for. She stood near the door like her presence alone could undo something. I walked past her. Not fast. Not angry. Like someone who has already said everything that needed saying, just not out loud. Because I had. In the silence. In the withdrawal. In every morning I made one coffee and rinsed one plate and left without hurrying. In every evening I walked past without asking. In every moment I stopped reaching across a gap she had built and called it normal. She said my name once as I reached the door. Just my name. It sounded like regret finally arriving somewhere it was no longer useful. I paused. Not for her. For me. To mark it. The last moment of something that had cost me more than I should have let it. Then I opened the door. She didn't follow. I didn't look back. Because here is what I know now. When someone treats you like a convenience, consistently, casually, without apology, the most powerful response isn't a fight. It isn't a scene or a speech designed to finally make them understand. It's to stop showing up where you are not chosen. Quietly. Completely. With the irreversible dignity of someone who decided their own peace mattered more than someone else's comfort. She thought patience was permanent. She was wrong. And the man who once stayed chose himself instead. Thank you for watching.